Superbwoman Sundays at 7. I'm your host, Janet Neal, the founder and queen bee at the Superbwoman Incorporated. So glad you've joined us. The Superbwoman operates with the belief that women can change this world in an instant when we realize it. And we give you the tools, the resources, the opportunities to step into your power so that you, in turn, can turn around and put out positive energy that can help all of us. I have been very lucky to have met so many wonderful examples of superb women, women who are comfortable in their own skin, women who have taken the time to understand who they are, and as a result are using those skills, those talents, those passions, and are now doing amazing things. Today's guest is no exception. I am all about getting rid of that ideal of being a superwoman. It serves no one. It only results in burnout and frustration. And the superb women that I keep meeting, that I know are out there, are wonderful examples of the way that it really works for everyone. So sit back and relax and enjoy this week's conversation with yet another superb woman, and come back next week for another one. Welcome to our show. I am so glad that you've joined us, and I have another amazing superb woman with me, Gloria Feldt. And before I get to Gloria, let me just tell you a little bit about her, because you are going to be amazed at her story. I saw Gloria at an event. I always like to tell people how I meet these amazing superb women. And Gloria was a speaker at an event that I went to, and as she's telling her story, what she's going to tell us in just a minute, well, first of all, I was amazed. And secondly, I was like, well, this is a woman I need on my show, because she is personification of what I'm trying to get across here. This concept that it's not about being a superwoman. It's about being a superb woman. It's about tapping into who you are, what's important to you, not doing things just because you should do them. And then look out at what can happen when you tap into that amazing power within. So let me tell you a little bit about Gloria. Gloria started off, she was a teen mom who dropped out of high school, and she has gone on to be not only the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood, but she now runs an organization called Take the Lead that's all about getting women into leadership roles. She's the author of 4 books, including a New York Times bestseller, Send Yourself Roses, that was written with Kathleen Turner. And she also is the author of No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. So welcome, Gloria.
Thank you, Janet. I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you could. So tell everyone the story that I heard you share about how you grew up in Texas and were a teen mom, and how did you get to be the head of Planned Parenthood?
Well, it's pretty symmetrical if you think about it, you know, when you think about the value system that would come from somebody who's had the experience herself of being a mom when she was far too young to do that, and then beginning to sort of like figure out, well, what are the solutions? Because I'm a pretty solution-oriented person. So in one way, it was very symmetrical, but I'll tell you the story. And, you know, the funny thing is that it was really hard for me to start telling people the story. I think it's often hard for us to tell our own stories. And
yes, it is.
And, you know, and sometimes I get really bored of hearing myself, but I've learned that it's important because, you know, I think that it's really helpful to anybody to know that it's not so much what you start with, but what you do with what you have, and where you take it. And that there's always something new you can do. And that, you know, one of the benefits of having done all the things that I've done and being at this stage of life is also to be able to tell anybody who's interested, and particularly younger people, that the good thing about life is that there's always an opportunity to do something else. You can always do something else. You can unchoose what you chose at first. There are just lots of different paths you can have in the course of a life. So that's the good news. Yes, I was born in a small Texas town and went to high school in an even smaller town. I always liken it to, if people have read The Last Picture Show, I went to high school in a dying West Texas town, and it was what does a teenager want more than anything else? A teenager wants to fit in, right? A teenager wants to be liked and be popular, and it was a culture in which girls were actually not encouraged to have careers. If you went to college, it was to get your MRS, they used to say. And so I bought the whole culture hook, line, and sinker because I wanted to totally fit in, and I was a little too precocious with it. So I married my high school sweetheart. We had 3 children by the time I was 20. Moved off we moved away from that town into a slightly larger town, which was Odessa, Texas, in the heart of the West Texas oil patch. So again, not exactly your most progressive for women kind of a culture that you could think of. And for those who are Friday Night Lights fans, that was kind of like a documentary of that part of my life, and it's really all true. And so, after I had my 3rd child, basically, I woke up. There was something like a light bulb that went off in my head, and I realized a couple of things. One was that a sheer terror that if I ever had to support these 3 children, I had no employable skills. I mean, that was really big. A second thing was that I loved my children very much, but I was remembering that I also had a brain. I had always been a good student, and I wanted to go to college. I started at college when my 3rd child, my youngest, was 4 months old. And there was only a community college at the time in Odessa. So I took courses very carefully so that I was away from the children the least amount of time possible. And I took 3 years to finish the first 2 years. At that point, that was as far as I could go. And but it was also, that was a time when the civil rights movement was really at its peak. And I became very attracted to the movement and to the whole movement for social justice in general. And so I started doing a lot of community volunteer work at that time. I had some part-time jobs, but I really wasn't at the stage where I was, really super employable yet. And so I started doing a lot of community volunteer work, and that was really great because, first of all, it got me a broader perspective on life. But secondly, from the work I did with civil rights related organizations, I noticed something. I noticed that the men were the leaders and the women were doing all the work. And I sort of I had this epiphany that, well, if there are civil rights, women must have them too.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was like a big eye opener. And at that point, I started getting involved in some of the women's organizations that were helping women advance. And one thing I got involved with at that time was the League of Women Voters. And that's where I learned a lot about how the political system works. And I began to see, from what I was learning there, well, you can actually change anything if you want to. You have to understand how the system works. You have to understand it. And then you can mobilize your resources and you can actually make changes. So as a result of the volunteer work I was doing for Head Start, I was offered a full-time teaching job. And I was delighted. So that was my first real job. I taught Head Start for 5 years, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I envisioned myself as being a teacher. That was traditional for women, right? And I couldn't be a nurse because I didn't like the sight of blood. And I'm not that crazy about sick people. And I couldn't be a secretary because I had almost failed typing in high school.
So we have a lot in common.
So that left teaching, those are your 3 choices, right? So fortunately I actually liked teaching then, and I still like it now. So I taught at Head Start for 5 years. And at that point, the University of Texas opened a branch in Odessa. So I decided to quit my job at Head Start so I could finish my last 2 years in 1 year. And that was what I did. And
Wow.
that was what I did. I wasn't just motivated. I was driven. I
Mm-hmm.
was driven. I was like, I am going to do this. I'm going to do this in 1 year. And I took 24 hours a semester. And, I just like barreled on
And
through.
had three little children at home.
And I had 3 little children at home. Yes, right. And so at this point, then so I thought I was finished with my degree in the first summer semester. And then they told me I needed another science course.
Oh, jeez.
And it really annoyed the heck out of me. I'm like, what? You need 3 more hours of science.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
I looked to see what was the easiest course I could take, because there aren't many 3-hour science courses. Usually they're 4 hours and have a lab, and they take a lot of your time.
Uh-huh.
So I looked for the easiest science course, and the only one that was only a 3-hour course was ecology. Ecology.
Uh-huh.
And so I signed up for ecology.
Mm-hmm.
My last summer semester. It was a second summer semester. And they talked a lot about issues around global population
Mm-hmm.
and the problems of environmental destruction related to overpopulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, there were some books out at that time that suggested that human beings would never be able to manage our own fertility, and that we would, there should be mandatory family planning, which I thought, no, I don't think that's going to work too well. It's not going to work too well. So I had heard about this little organization called Planned Parenthood. It was in West Texas at the time. And Planned Parenthood's been around since 1916 in one form or another. But in West Texas, it had started in the early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided that I would do my term paper on this voluntary family planning organization just to find out more about it. And I asked to interview the executive director, who I had never met.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed her. I interviewed a few other people on the staff and the board. And that was the end of that. I wrote my paper, end of story, as far as I was concerned.
Uh-huh.
And a couple of weeks later, she called me and she said, I'm leaving. I think you should submit a resume.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, well, I've never had a formal job interview.
Wow.
I've never had a real resume. It would be good experience to do this. I'm in no danger of being hired because I've never managed an organization. I know nothing about healthcare administration.
Right.
I know nothing about this movement. They'll never hire me, but it will just be, I'll learn something from the process.
Uh-huh.
And, as they say, the rest is history. They offered me, I went through the interview process. They offered me a job. I took it because it sounded like it would be interesting to do for a few years,
Mm-hmm.
but it ended up being a 30-year career culminating as the national president. And that's really how it happened. I mean, it really was serendipity, and it was serendipity, but with I think you have to start with the mindset of being open to fortuity, being open to what's presented to you. Absolutely. And I'm not saying to say yes to everything that comes down the pike, but for me at that time, saying yes to an opportunity was a pretty smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, something I would have never known about myself was that I actually had what I call a CEO brain. There are characteristics that I had that I didn't realize I had around a willingness to assume that level of responsibility in order to be able to have opportunity to try new things, to have a big vision, to mobilize resources to make a big vision happen. That turned out to be what I really liked to do and actually did the best.
Fabulous.
So, it was fate and coupled with just being willing to say yes. So that's the story of that.
I think that, before you go further with that, I just want to emphasize that point that you were making, that it's that willingness to say yes. Mm-hmm. And studies show over and over again that women tend to feel like they need to have 80% of the qualifications
right.
before they'll say yes.
Right.
And if they've got 20%, they'll say, okay.
Right.
So you are a testament to, here you thought you had very little going for you there, and look what the result was. So fabulous example of that.
And, we're just given that what you just said, I'd like to jump into the question that you said you were going to ask me at some point about who helped me along the way.
Yeah, sure.
Because this is a really important point. And this is, I would not have had that position without this person. And
Mm-hmm.
it's an amazing, amazing story. The woman who ran the Head Start program, who had hired me there,
Uh-huh.
was a really interesting character. She was a retired journalist, a really crusty, cranky, most people found her very hard to get along with,
Uh-huh.
but with a heart of gold.
Mm-hmm.
And, she was retired, but she was like giving the rest of her life to starting these programs for low income people in West Texas, which again is not the easiest place to
Wow.
be able to do those things.
Yeah.
And so she clearly saw skills in me that I didn't see in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And she frequently would ask me to take on projects. And that's where I learned to see a project through. She would say, this needs to get done, so just go do it. And
Uh-huh.
I'd have to figure out what the vision was. I'd have to figure out what were the pieces we had to put together in order to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually had more experience than I realized I had
Right.
just by
Exactly.
virtue of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the year that I took off to go back to school,
Mm-hmm.
I heard that she was in the hospital, that she had what was probably terminal breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to visit her in the hospital. And this was that summer that I was taking those last courses.
Mm-hmm.
I went to visit her in the hospital, and as I left, she handed me an envelope. And when I got home, I opened the envelope, and it was a letter of recommendation.
Aw.
Now, remember that job at Head Start was the only real job I had, the only full-time job I'd ever had.
Right.
And so therefore, she was the only boss I'd ever had,
Mm-hmm.
and she was the only person who could
Wow.
testify to what I was capable of doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the only really, that kind of letter of recommendation that I had to provide along with that resume when I went for that job interview. And I remember the board chair referencing that letter of recommendation.
Wow.
And I know that her name was Mildred. I know that I would not be where I am today if it were not for Mildred. And if it were not for Mildred, both asking me to do things that I didn't realize I was capable of doing, but also taking that extra step at a time when she knew she was dying. She took that extra step to write recommendation. Now, she probably did it for other people as well, but I mean, just the fact that you just never know, if you do one kindness for someone, what that can do to help them and to literally change their lives.
Absolutely.
So I like to tell that story in honor of Mildred. And it's that, that whole principle of what I call sister courage. And, do a little, even if you're not asked.
Yep.
Don't wait to be asked. Do something that will help some other woman advance.
Beautiful. Oh, that's a lovely story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes.
Sounds like, those people that believe in you when you cannot or will not believe in it for yourself are just a blessing.
Right.
And it's so wonderful that she was in your life.
Right.
So here you are at Planned Parenthood. You worked your way up the ladder. And just share with people a little bit about because you achieved so much when you were there. Share with people a little bit about what you achieved when you were in that role there.
Well, I ran two different affiliates, one in West Texas, and then I moved to Arizona. And I had the opportunity to grow. I learned quickly that what I liked to do and what I did really well was to grow an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so in West Texas, I grew us from 5 to 11 clinics. And then, in a huge territory of West Texas, just gigantic, bigger than most countries in Europe. And then Arizona, the territory was kind of like that as well. It was probably 2/3 of the state at least. And so then when I got to Arizona, the affiliate there had a very aggressive strategic plan. They wanted to provide services all over a state that was growing very, very rapidly. Mm-hmm. So again, I had an opportunity to just simply grow the availability of family planning and reproductive health care services for women. Mm-hmm. And that's, I would say that remains probably the most fun part
Mm.
that I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's great fun to do that.
Mhm.
But then I also developed advocacy. I developed fundraising. I expanded the range of services that we were providing so that people could get more of their health care in one place,
Mhm.
and particularly low income women who didn't have
Mhm.
other sources of health
Right.
care. And so that I did, as with those affiliates. Then when I became the national president, I would say the two things that were most important. One was turning the institutional mindset around. It was like a big old ship, big old cranky ship that
Yeah.
needed to be turned around. It was a time when the whole organization was in a very deep depression,
Mm.
emotionally, psychologically, and the growth had become less than static. It was actually declining.
Mhm.
It was a time when there was a lot of violence against
Mm.
people who worked in family planning clinics, and there were murders and firebombs, and that takes a toll on people,
Yeah.
emotional toll.
Absolutely.
And the organization had five, I think, leadership changes, 4 or 5 leadership changes in 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
So when that happens, there's a lot of instability, and donors start retreating because they're not sure they can trust the
Mm.
organization to work properly. But I think the biggest problem really was this sort of emotional low,
Mhm.
and that resulted in a movement being completely focused on reacting. It was
Yeah.
reactive instead of being proactive.
Right.
And
Mhm.
what gives you optimism, and what gives you strength and energy, and really a feeling that you can accomplish things, is when you have an intention
Right.
that is a worthy intention, and you mobilize yourself and your resources around that intention.
Right.
So I would say one of the most important things that I did was to change that institutional mindset.
Mm.
My phrase was, don't be a thermostat, don't be a thermometer, be a thermostat.
Mm.
In other words, set the temperature.
Right.
Don't wait for somebody else to set it, and then you have to go get a sweater.
Right.
You be the one to establish what the temperature is. You be the one to set the agenda. And instead of waiting for somebody to attack you, you decide what policy questions we're going to be talking about, and make them talk on our turf. And so the way that I made them talk on our turf was to mobilize a very big campaign to get coverage of contraception by insurance plans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I chose that was because we knew 90 some odd % of Americans use birth control at some point in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And approximately that same number support the access to birth control.
Yeah.
People still may think it's controversial because there's that other 10%, but even they use it when they need it. So we know that. So it was not easy, but it was something that I knew we could mobilize politically on both sides of the aisle.
Mm-hmm.
So that we could have Republicans and Democrats, and we could have people of all different faiths who would in some way support this kind of legislation. And this was starting in 1997.
Okay.
1997.
Okay.
And then in 1998, we were able to get contraceptive coverage in the federal employees insurance plan, which is that's the largest insurance plan in the country. And when that plan covers something, generally speaking, other plans tend to follow suit. So that was a big step forward.
Yeah, definitely.
But we couldn't get anybody to notice this whole thing. We couldn't get any media coverage. We couldn't get any traction. We were like, okay, well, how can we make this a story? Well, guess what? Soon thereafter, guess what came on the market?
Oh,
Viagra.
yes.
Viagra. Well, insurance plans all covered Viagra.
Oh, how interesting.
So, if you wanted to see women ticked off,
right.
it was what? This insurance plan is going to cover Viagra, but it's not going to cover my birth control. Are you kidding me?
Right.
So that really gave a lot of visibility to the whole idea, and then it started passing in state after state after state. and we won some lawsuits, also some civil rights based lawsuits, and gender equality kinds of lawsuits. And so the net result of it is that, this is how politics works. You never get everything, but you always get something.
Right.
And then over time, it became just routine. And then, of course, when this was after I had left, when President Obama came into office and started working on the Affordable Health Care Plan, it was easy for insurance companies to say, well, sure, we're going to cover contraception because it's just normal, right?
Right.
So now it's just normal, and that's as it should be. But it wasn't, it took some doing to make it happen. And in terms of things that have reached the most people and helped the most women and families, and it's a big deal. That one's a big deal. So I would say those are growing, turning the mindset around, and then getting contraceptive coverage as a routine kind of thing. Those are the things I would point to there.
Fabulous. Well, I personally want to thank you for the work that you did. It's really wonderful. And so how did all of this that you've learned and acquired, how has that led you to where you are today?
When I left Planned Parenthood, my goal was to write. Since I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a writer. That was my first notion of what I would be. And I always liked words and playing with words and writing. And I used to write little children's stories when I was in the first grade. Excuse me, starting in the first grade, I would write little children's stories. And so 30 years was that was a good run. Yes. And I had decided that I would leave at that point anyway. And so I particularly wanted to start being able to write. And so that was and have a quieter life. It was going to be a less stressful life.
Yeah, a little more private.
Yeah, that didn't last too long. But so the second book that I wrote after I moved into my new career was the book called No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. I wrote that book because I had done an article for Elle magazine in 2008 that asked me to do an article about women running for office. And as you may recall, with a bit of deja vu, that was a moment when it seemed we were going to have our first woman president.
Right.
And so their idea was that this was going to be a great story about how women would be just really eager to jump in and run for office. And of course, I quickly found out the story was, in fact, women don't. And that one of the reasons why it's been so hard to break the glass ceiling is that not only in politics, but also in companies and even in the nonprofit world and big nonprofits, that women actually don't necessarily walk through the doors that have been opened. And that there are some really important and serious reasons why, some good reasons why. And that the reasons, as I analyzed them, had to do with women's own relationship with power and intentionality. And that we've been socialized essentially to see power as power over. And women, I think, are smart enough not to want that kind of power.
Right.
But partly it's because we've borne the brunt of negative aspects of that kind of power.
Sure.
When you know that a third of the women in the country or in the world have had some kind of domestic abuse or sexual abuse or something like that, I mean, you realize that why would you want that?
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, but on the other hand, you can't get anything done in this world. You can't make any positive change if you're unwilling to use power.
Right.
So I started grappling with the question of how do we fix that? And so the whole premise of No Excuses is that women have this ambivalent relationship with power. It is culturally learned. It's not hardwired. It's culturally learned. And what I would find is that when I would start talking with women about changing our definition of power from that old oppressive and frankly no longer very functional power over to an expansive, innovative, positive idea of having the power to make life better for your kids, make life better for your community. And women, by the way, won't run for office just for the power, but they'll run for office if they think there's a problem that needs to be solved to make life better for their kids. They'll do that. They'll do that. And so I would just see women's faces relax. And I was teaching an academic course already that I had designed called Women, Power, and Leadership, in which I taught about these things. And in the book, No Excuses, being a practical activist, each chapter has, well, this is what the situation is. And here's what you can do about it.
Fabulous.
Here's how you can navigate the world as it is. And here are 9 power tools that you can use to even change the world as it is and make it a better world that you want.
Excellent.
And I mean, because after all, the systems we live in were designed by men for men who had women at home, right?
Right.
And hardly anybody lives that way anymore, at least not their entire lives. Most families are 2-earner families, or they're single parents.
Right.
Or, you know, there just are all kinds of family situations now that didn't actually, they did exist, but we thought they didn't exist in generations ago.
Right.
So I found that then people started asking me to do workshops with this material. And I created a day-long workshop in addition to the academic course I was teaching. And then it sort of gradually dawned on me that to make a real impact, it has to be more than just me. There, you have to really have an organization or a movement behind you. Right. And so a colleague, a friend, and I started talking about it. And we actually first started trying to get either a university or a big women's organization to take this whole program and do it. And we found that by and large, they didn't want to change that much. One of them even hired us to do a business plan for them and paid us for it. At the end of which they said, "Thank you. You helped us realize we don't want to change."
Wow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So at that point, we just decided, like Thelma and Louise, to start driving this car. And fortunately, we did not go off a cliff. But in keeping with with my belief that if you want to do something big, you might as well do something big, because you can't really increment your way to success. You can't increment your way to making a big change, but you can, if you have a big vision. You may not always get 100% there, but you'll get a lot further than if you hadn't. One of the things that I had calculated when I wrote the article for Elle magazine was that at the rate that women were achieving closer to parity, it would take 70 years to reach parity.
Wow.
And that was if nothing went backwards.
Right.
Well, I'd been an activist already for women for several decades. And if I could think of myself as, if I thought I could live another 70 years, I would be happy to do that. But the odds were not looking too good.
Right.
So the stake in the ground, and people say, why do you say you're going to reach parity by 2025? The answer is simple. First of all, I actually think it's doable right now for some important reasons, which I will share. But also because I can live till that long. I can live till 2025, and because I want to see this while I'm still alive to see it, and I want to be part of it. And I really believe it's possible. And I believe it's possible because the convergence right now of the justice case for women having a fair and equal share of leadership roles has, for the first time, been shown to converge with the business case.
Yeah.
And there's, many studies have been done now that show that companies that have more women in their upper leadership make more money.
Absolutely.
And so the combination of that business case with the fact that it's the right thing to do is, we've never had that before. So that's why I think we can do it now.
Wonderful. Well, it's fabulous. And the name of your organization again is Take the Lead.
The name of the organization is Take the Lead, and the website is taketheleadwomen.com. This is another one of those. When we started, we had absolutely not 2 dimes to rub together. And so somebody owned Take the Lead. It was a dog company. And so if we had been smart, we would have raised however much money it would have taken to buy that URL, but we didn't. Right. So we chose to use the URL Take the Lead Women. And actually it's not, we almost named ourselves that, but we decided to just call it Take the Lead because it's shorter. And because this whole leadership parity thing ultimately needs to include men as well as women. So we didn't want to limit ourselves.
Excellent.
And we do 4 things. Our mission says we prepare, develop, inspire, and propel women to take their fair and equal share of leadership positions across every sector by 2025. And so the prepare part is training. We do training. The develop is mentoring. We have a mentoring program. Inspire is role modeling. And propel is a thought leadership component that helps us change the narrative in our heads from problem focus to, well, here are the solutions. Let's talk about the solutions. So that's what we do.
Fabulous. And I'll have a slide at the end of this. So you can find out more information by looking at that slide and give
Great.
the website.
Great.
So just fantastic work, so aligned with my belief system and what I do personally and what my organization does. And you've already spoken about, one person that helped you. I always say that Superb Women realize that we cannot do this by ourselves.
Right.
Is there anyone else that has helped you on your journey?
Oh, there have been so many. Really, it's interesting. People often ask me if I've had a mentor. And I have to acknowledge that I didn't have a mentor per se in the way people think about having a longer term mentor.
Right.
But I did have several people who, like Mildred, pushed me or pulled me or told me I could do more than I did. Yeah. And the first one really was my father. My father told me from the time I can remember, you can do anything your pretty little head desires. That's how he said it over and over and over again.
That's nice.
And he tended to treat me like a human being, not like a child so much, but like a person.
Yep.
And unfortunately, when I was very young, the weight of what I was hearing in the society, and frankly, my mother never felt that empowered herself. And so, what I was, the role models I saw around me didn't confirm that belief. But fortunately, I kept his voice in my head. And as I got older, I began to hear it. And I appreciate that, just tremendously. And I also think that it's important for girls to have that kind of message coming from their fathers as well as their mothers.
Absolutely.
It's very, very helpful. So my father, Mildred, and then there were people who, once I started working for Planned Parenthood, just identified me and would reach out and that's how I got recruited for each next position that I had.
Right.
I never sought them, honestly. I was always recruited. And so it's interesting, the people who do that kind of proactive, reaching out to you. So one was a regional director who did that. And now it just seems like almost every day there's somebody who, that they're helping you in some way or another. And I think it's also important to recognize that it's not necessarily somebody older than you. It's not necessarily somebody who's more experienced than you. I just saw an email fly across my computer from a young woman who I met through the mentoring system that we have at Take the Lead, which is called Glassbreakers Take the Lead. And it's a partnership with a company that was founded by two young women in their 20s to help women get peer mentorship.
Wow.
And a young woman I was matched with has become somebody that I learn as much from her as she learns from me. So we kind of mentor each other. So I think mentorship and sponsorship, proactively helping somebody move along is really what we can all do. We can all do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so another trait that I see in superb women is that they've learned to let go of shoulds. What's the should that you have learned to let go of?
Be nice. Be nice. Be a good girl.
Nice.
Be a good girl.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to say, "Oh, Gloria is such a good child. You never know you have a child around." So I know that was meant as a compliment.
Yeah.
But what I took from that was, just be small, be quiet.
Exactly.
Don't make yourself heard. And so I've let go of that. And my most recent one, which I just told somebody yesterday, was I'm done with being humble about things that I don't need to be humble about. And when somebody put a question on I've been training other people to do my training, because the way we will scale up Take the Lead, and frankly, the way I will be able to leave the legacy I want to leave is by having many other people who can actually do the work that I've created. And we have our website page, and somebody asked a question on it about they had seen an article that was entitled "Why Women's Leadership Programs Don't Work." And so she'd ask a question about, well, why don't they work? Or what works? And I said, what works is what we do.
Yeah.
I said, what works is exactly what we do. And
Yeah.
I said, I am over being humble about this. I am not going to couch this term at all. I'm going to say straight out to you, I know what works. I designed it.
Mm-hmm.
It works.
Mm-hmm.
You all have learned it. So you need to get your backbone stiff enough to say, I know what works.
Exactly.
I can do that.
Good for you. Good for you. That's a good one.
So humble is no longer my thing.
That's wonderful. So one other thing that I have found that plays a big role in the lives of superb women that I've talked to is gratitude. How does that play in your life?
I've had to learn to express that gratitude. It's not that I haven't been grateful. It's that I'm always on to the next thing. And so instead of remembering to say thank you to somebody or just to process the gratefulness about something, people have literally had to sit me down and say, look, you need to stop, and you need to recognize what people have done. So I'm very conscious of that now. And I think what I'm most grateful for is, first of all, having the good health and vitality that enables me to continue doing this work that I care so much about. I am very grateful for that. Now I do work at it. I exercise every day. I eat reasonably healthy food, but anybody can get sick. Anybody can have tragedies in their lives. And I've been really, really blessed to be able to continue doing the work that I love. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful to the fact that I have a husband who has always, as much as he may not, he can grouse a lot about all the work that I do. But in truth, he has always been a part and been supportive of the movements that I have been involved with. And he's always really helped me along the way. And he answers the phone well, and he makes dinner every night. And so I'm extremely grateful to that. And I would say I'm grateful to my children, because truly they made me what I am.
Absolutely.
They taught me more than anything else or anybody else.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's wonderful. So, Gloria, I just want to thank you for all of your stories and your wonderful experience. So tell us what's next for you.
What's next for me with Take the Lead is scaling it up. I want it to become large enough and impactful enough that we really can get to 2025 and be able to say, yes, women have received their fair and equal share of leadership positions. And I do believe that's possible. And the way we're doing it is by my teaching other people to do the training that I do. And then there's a big piece that we need to do around evaluating that so we can show the impact of it. And then we can do more of building out the other parts of our program. For example, our role modeling component, we have a free virtual happy hour every month that people can participate in, where I interview an accomplished woman like you every month. And so we have those kinds of free resources on our website. So scaling up Take the Lead and getting it to a point where it's sustainable financially. We're a nonprofit, so we try to make our, what we have available, not just to women who already have access, but also to other women who have high potential in this world. And so we have to raise a lot of money, as well as being able to earn money for the training that we do. So I want to make the organization sustainable financially so that I can step out a bit and do the things I like best, and have other smart people come in and actually run the daily operations of it. And there are a few more books on the list that need to be written. So that's pretty much what's next. And, spending a little more time with the family. And that's, I think, at this stage of my life, another really important thing that I'm consciously, intentionally doing. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Well, I just have been so thrilled to have you on the show, to get to know you a little bit. In awe of all that you have accomplished. And, don't Don't be humble about that.
Right. Okay.
I just want to thank you again for being my guest. And again, we'll have all of your contact information here so that people can reach out, find out more about it. TakeTheLeadWomen.com.
Right.
And there's just a lot of great resources. I was just on there, and there's a lot of great information and resources there. So, Gloria, thank you again for being my guest this week.
Thank you, Janet. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And stay tuned for next week when we'll have another superb woman. And until then, have a superb week. Take care.